I survived a zoonosis. We're
Which
here,
one would that be?
we're here with Dr. Sam Wisely, University of Florida professor. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam.
Yeah, my
I really
pleasure.
appreciate your knowledge. As we were discussing before, I attempted to read one of your academic papers. I didn't get very far. I'm endlessly impressed with the discipline and knowledge that it takes to do something like that. And it benefits all of us. When those papers are out there, people can read that and learn. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's fun doing science.
Science is cool. Science is cool. And, one of the things that's really cool about science is it saves lives.
Yeah.
We were talking about Joe last time and how he got bit by a raccoon and he had to immediately go get the rabies vaccine. Well, that's science in action right there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, he was lucky, right? He knew what to do, and importantly, his health department knew what to do with him as well.
Right. Although he did find some Google printouts in his medical record, so we're not sure really how much they knew what to do. They could look it up. They did a Google search.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
I guess
That was a little distressing to hear.
yeah, I guess somebody in the ER said, "You want me to Google that for you?" They did.
So you've had some rabies things happening with you this week, haven't you?
Right. So after our last discussion, Dr. Sam, I decided to investigate what it would take to actually get my pre-exposure rabies vaccine series, the prophylactic vaccination. So I contacted the Department of Health for the state of Florida. Then I was ushered to the Department of Health for my county, which is Pinellas. And I was moved around quite a few times with this department and that department, through their phone bank. And I finally got a call back, and it was not entirely clear what they were talking about. They said I needed to go to Passport. I don't know what Passport is, but we have Google, and Google found Passport, and Passport is a private company that gives vaccines for travel. So if you were traveling to a country with specific disease risk profiles, you could go to Passport and you could get vaccinated against some of these things, And I know if you look on the State Department website, they'll actually give you recommendations, right? For, okay, if you're going here, you should have these vaccines.
Exactly.
So I went there and I got my vaccine. The first vaccine was a Thursday, then I waited 7 days and got the second vaccine. I would say that there was absolutely no muscle pain whatsoever. Of course, it was in the shoulder. I didn't really even feel the shot. It didn't hurt whatsoever. Although the needle that she used to mix, they kind of compound the vaccine right in front of you. They get the two
Hmm.
vials and use a rather large needle to mix, these two vials together. And then, of course, I got one, then the next one. But I was, kind of shocked at how expensive it was.
How
And I've
much
got
did
the
it
proof
cost?
right here.
Yeah.
It's not cheap. With the visit, it's $580 per shot.
Wow.
So I just want to remind my potential clients that you cannot do it cheaper because having that shot is a prerequisite to taking raccoons out of your yard. And if you don't think that's true, if you get bit or scratched, I can assure you you're going to pay a lot more than $1,000 to get the post-exposure protocol. And I think we're talking about at least 3 shots for that. And the immunoglobulin, is that how we say that, Dr. Sam?
Yep, that's right.
And that's presuming, since rabies is not that common, as Joe pointed out, uh, you need to find somebody that has that medicine on hand.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's another $3,000 to $5,000 just for that one shot.
Right. Uh, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be a
Mhm.
lot more expensive than having a trapper do that work for you.
Mhm.
We talked about this. I want to bring this up to share with the audience. I find this pretty terrifying. This is the clinical phases of rabies. Uh, would you call it infection? Would you call that, Dr. Sam?
Yeah, that's right. So the progression of clinical illness, and it looks like this is in people, the description of this. Yeah, and so they call the incubation 20 to 90 days, and I think that's probably true if you have a large exposure. There are plenty of cases that we've seen where people have been asymptomatic for up to 6 months before they show the onset of symptoms. So that's highly, highly variable. Um, CDC recommends you need to get your post-exposure vaccination within 72 hours of exposure. But yeah, once these symptoms start, what they call here the prodrome symptoms, that already that's too late. It is simply going to progress through until death.
So what's really terrifying about this is, we are a species that kind of lives in denial. So if somebody is exposed, I mean, they can basically say, well, I don't feel anything. It's been a few days. I should be fine. But the reality is that it could go 3 months and then hit this prodome phase, and it's too late.
Yeah, yeah, it is terrifying. I agree. We've had our first rabies exposure in Florida this year already.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So you sent the link. It was an otter, which are probably very powerful animals to begin with. It sounds like the otter bit right through the victim's finger.
Yeah.
How does an otter just show up with rabies? How did the otter get rabies? I mean, when we look at this particular slide, I mean, something had to infect the otter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so that's a good question, and we don't know in this case what it was. We will know eventually when the CDC tests this otter and then they look at the sequence of the rabies virus. They'll at least be able to tell you if it's a bat rabies or a raccoon rabies. Because in this chart here that you've put up, it's raccoons and it's bats that are the reservoir species in Florida.
Okay.
But if a bat or a raccoon comes into contact with, in this picture, what you see is these middle animals. These are spillover animals. It's when a raccoon bites an otter, or if a bat bites an otter, then they become infected. And then once they're infected, people can become infected if they get bit by those animals. I can't explain like how that happens, like the visualization of a raccoon running up and biting an otter and an otter allowing that to happen. I don't know how it happens, but we regularly get rabid otters in Florida. I would say
Wow.
oftentimes it's not a lot, but it's consistent, 1 to 2 a year, every year, of rabid otters. And they're spectacular, right? Because when they attack humans, I mean, my goodness, that's it's newsworthy every time. It is newsworthy. This was a 74-year-old man who was fishing on the side of a pond, and this otter jumped up out of the pond and attacked him.
Yeah, I kind of think that we look at otters the same way we look at dolphins. Oh, isn't he cute? But they're really kind of apex predators, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, they're formidable predators. Absolutely. Yeah. You would not want to tangle with an otter.
So, a bat or a raccoon that's infected with rabies, obviously it's the perdome phase or further on down the line, if that's applicable to the animal. Do they just want to attack other things?
Yeah, it's true. So, I mean, the rabies virus is actually pretty ingenious in a way. So, it's one of a handful of pathogens that actually change the behavior of the host that it's in. So, a normally docile dog that might be very friendly will become rabid and want to bite and become ferocious. They lose the ability to swallow. So part of the rabies response is a paralysis. So their throat becomes paralyzed. And that gives that sort of stereotypical foaming at the mouth symptom that we see. And that's the virus really ensuring that it gets transmitted because the virus is in the saliva. So the more saliva that's being produced while this animal is biting something else, that ensures transmission of the virus from one animal to the next. It's diabolical.
That's pretty ingenious, and I've seen other things like fungus that pretty much take over the brains of ants.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, we live in a universe of infinite possibilities. If you just for a moment imagine that there is not just one universe, but there may be an infinite number of universes. And with that infinite number of universe, pretty much anything is possible. So, is the rabies virus ingenious, or is this simply a random variation that allows this thing to survive? So if it didn't cause the throat to stop working, maybe the virus never would have succeeded.
Yeah, evolution is funny that way. I mean, it really, I mean, one of the things you have to think of is that, there's it happens over a really long period of time.
Right.
So these accumulations of sort of ingenious little mutations can accrue over time. And yeah, I don't think it's random because we see this happen in other pathogens, right? Like not related, but parallel times that this has evolved. And the one I always think about is Toxoplasma gondii. And that is a protozoan parasite, so a unicellular parasite, but it's not like a bacteria. It's a eukaryote, and it evolved in cats, but it takes two species in order for the life cycle of this parasite to complete. And so the other species are rodents. And
I've
so it
heard
doesn't
about
really
them.
cause much disease in cats, but when it gets into rodents, it changes their behavior so they're attracted to cat urine, right? And
Right.
so they go up to cats, the cats eat them, and then it infects the cat. The parasite infects the cat. So again, changing the behavior of the host that you're in so that it's transmitted.
Would you say that there's a disease that many humans are afflicted with that's a result of handling cat feces? Would you say that that disease, and you'll have to name it for me, uh, behaves in a similar way? Are people who are afflicted with this more cat lovers than other people?
So it is the same parasite. So when pregnant women are advised not to have cats or not to handle cat boxes, it's Toxoplasma gondii. That same parasite can get into the fetus, the human fetus,
Right.
and cause problems. And so that's one of the reasons why pregnant women shouldn't handle cats. But what There are some studies that seem to suggest that cat lovers have a higher prevalence of Toxoplasma infection than people who don't love cats. It's not direct proof, but it's kind of compelling
That's
evidence.
interesting, but isn't that introducing a chicken and egg scenario? I mean, what came first, the toxoplasmosis or the cat loving?
Yeah, no, I mean, we can't infect humans with Toxoplasma and see if they change their behavior. So it has to
Right.
be these correlative studies that we do.
Wow, that is really interesting. The other thing that I did a little research on to talk about today, the Spalus ascarius, I acknowledge that this is, by admission of the scientific community, very rare. Hardly anybody gets affected by this. But what I don't like about this disease, it really does remind me of the the pardome gate in the life cycle of rabies. In this case, it looks like once you get to stage 9, when these eggs from this raccoon roundworm begin to hatch in your body, they go to your brain and I guess, your spinal cord tissue. And at that point, it's very difficult uh, to treat.
Yeah.
So it's again one of these things that, okay, you don't know you have this. I guess it's like a prion, isn't it? You ate a hamburger in London during your summer vacation, and now you've got. You know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, you're right. It's rare, but it has high consequence if you get it. And the problem is that, particularly in Florida, raccoons are everywhere. And raccoons are super attracted to human habitation. They love hanging out in our pools. They like rooting around in our garbage. I have chickens at my house. They
Oh,
love hanging out by my chicken coop. So yeah, I mean, I think there can be a pretty high risk of, well, there's a high risk of exposure to raccoons, right? And then all of a sudden that allows you to be susceptible to all of these raccoon-based diseases that we've been talking about today.
so how are you protecting your chickens from raccoons? Do you have a really sturdy coop?
Yeah, so our coop is raccoon proof and it's snake proof. We have real small chicken wire, but they're free range during the day, and they put themselves to bed at night and then we close them up.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what other diseases? We talked about I think the herpes B from these monkeys on the East Coast, right? What's going on there?
Nothing new that I know of. There's, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission really, I think they monitor their populations just really using citizen science so people can report when they've seen monkeys. Um, but really, other than just cautioning people not to feed monkeys or any wildlife for that matter, they've taken a pretty hands off approach.
You also mentioned last time that you were worried about, I think it was swine flu.
African swine fever.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's a global, it's another global pandemic. So we had a global pandemic of SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID in humans. This is a pig pandemic. So worldwide, pigs are being afflicted with this virus called African swine fever virus. It causes a hemorrhagic disease, meaning that animals start bleeding from the inside out, and it's highly contagious, and it's highly deadly in pigs. It is not a human disease.
It sounds like
Um,
Ebola for pigs.
That's exactly what it is. It is the
Wow.
Ebola of pigs. That's exactly right. But it has caused a huge disruption in the global trade of pigs and in pork production. I mean, they have had to euthanize hundreds of millions of pigs in their country.
Wow.
And it's marching through Europe right now. So I just came back from Serbia on Sunday, where I had visited an African swine fever outbreak, and it's not pretty. I mean, they have these majestic European boar in these forests, and seeing
Wow.
them laying dead in the forest is really a pretty disturbing sight.
Well, what else did you see there? What was it principally about the pig virus? Your trip?
Yeah, yeah. So mostly looking to see what an ASF outbreak looks like. You know, we're very worried about it coming to Florida. It's in the Dominican Republic right now, and Dominican Republic right now, and so we're worried that it could spread to Florida. You know, we don't have much of a big domestic pork production, but we have a lot of wild pigs and feral swine in Florida. And so there's a potential that it could become established in Florida.
But unlike Ebola, which is the vector, is that the correct word? The vector of transmission for Ebola is fluids. This must be an airborne pathogen, correct?
So, yeah, it's complicated. So, there's actually multiple routes of transmission for this. I think most people, when it's moving through a pig population, I think most people think of it as have nose to nose contact. So, not necessarily aerosolized, but, mucus
Okay.
happening. I think it can be sexually transmitted as well. Um, I think the way it gets moved around a lot is that it actually survives a lot of the processing that humans do. So actually sandwich meat and sausage can still have live virus if an infected animal is processed.
You're telling me that a processed meat, a cooked meat, can still contain a live virus?
If it's cured at a low temperature, yeah. And a lot of our hams and sausages are cured at a low temperature.
And this
Yeah.
poses no risk to humans?
It is not a human pathogen. No, it's not. Causes a lot of economic harm, though, for sure.
Right.
For sure. And I should mention, too, it can also be tick-borne. So there's a type of tick in Florida that we have that can actually change the whole transmission dynamics of it as well.
Having all of those dead pigs out in the wild cannot lead to good things either, can it? I mean,
No,
what are the
no.
potential consequences of that?
Yeah, I can't fathom it really, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
Yeah, it could be interesting times. I mean, there's people that I've heard talking about it that kind of say not maybe if it's going to come to Florida, but perhaps when it's going to come to
Wow.
Florida, having it so close in the Caribbean basin. Having said that, USDA is spending a lot of time and effort trying to not let it happen. So,
Right, and that's by limiting, animals being imported and, these guys trying to get animals hidden in their pants through customs, right?
yeah. And you go to the airport and you pass through customs right now, and there's African swine fever posters up everywhere telling you exactly what you cannot bring into the US.
Well, I think for all the people who get annoyed that they can't bring in a fancy sausage from overseas, now we know why. Because that sausage could still contain a live virus.
That's exactly why you can't bring in sausage.
I always wondered that. Now I know.
Your questions are answered here.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So you mentioned ticks. We don't hear a lot about ticks in Florida because a lot of that crazy stuff is going on more up north. But what do we need to be aware of as far as tick-borne diseases here?
Yeah, so There's a number of bacterial infections that you can get. Everything from Lyme disease, which is sort of the
Really?
one we think about the most, to um, spotted fever, which is caused by a rickettsia. Probably in north central Florida, where I am, the most common one is called ehrlichiosis, and that's caused by a bacteria called Ehrlichia. And there's sort of two main ticks that if they bite you can cause disease. One is the deer tick, and that's for Lyme disease. But then the Lone Star tick. The Lone Star tick is the one that has that white dot on its
Okay.
back, if you've ever seen it. So yeah, none of these pathogens happen at like huge high prevalence. And so if you get bit by a tick, the first thing you want to do is just remove it as soon as you find it there and make sure you get the head with you. And so really with tweezers, you want to get as close to the base, as close to your skin as you can, and in one movement, pull it out. Um, and then wash it really well and then monitor it, right? Make sure that you don't start getting sort of a fever and chills maybe 7 to 10 days after you've had that tick bite. And if you do, go to your doctor and make sure you tell him that you were bit by a tick, because virtually all of the ones that I've just told you about can be easily treated with antibiotics, but you have to know that you have it in order to treat it with antibiotics.
Now, what is this? I think it's a tick-borne disease. Correct me if I'm wrong. That makes you allergic to meat.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So that's called alpha-gal
Yes,
syndrome.
alpha gal. Right.
And I don't understand it too well. A lot of people don't understand it very well. But basically, what happens is when ticks bite you, they actually inject you with a bunch of proteins that they make. And, they do things like it's an anesthetic, right? So that you can't feel them biting you. And then they have other proteins that are anticoagulants so that they can actually slurp up blood
Right.
as quickly as possible. And I don't know which protein it is, but one of those proteins can actually cause a change in your immunology, in your immune response. And you can have sort of this autoimmune response where all of a sudden you become allergic to animal flesh. And so
Wow.
when you eat any sort of red meat, right? So beef or pork, you can actually, any mammal essentially, you have a allergic reaction, and it can be very varied. It can be from like the classic anaphylactic shock to something that almost looks more like Crohn's disease, where you have this inability to digest and problems that way. So I think it's pretty hard to diagnose because you have this really wide range of symptoms that you can get.
And that is from a tick.
That's from a tick. It's
Yeah.
your own body doing it. It's not a pathogen, it's an
Right.
autoimmune response.
So something in this tick pretty much changes the way your body works.
Yeah,
Is this in
exactly.
Florida or not in Florida?
Yeah, so it's those Lone Star ticks, and they are everywhere in Florida, right? And they are, I mean, I it happens a lot. I know at least 5 people who have alpha gal.
What?
Yeah, yeah. All biologists, right? All people who spend a lot of time in the woods that get bit by ticks regularly.
Wow. That's terrifying. So what is their life like now?
Well, they don't eat red meat. But other than
And
that, fine. I mean, that's just what you do is you have to stop eating red meat.
wow.
And there's some indication that if you do that for quite a while, then you can return that autoimmune response lessens. But I think it's very individualistic, right? I think it can
Right.
really vary from person to person.
Yeah, I'd go to the allergist and get a time test for bacon.
Yes, exactly.
Uh, well, why don't we go into a little bit of conspiracy theory here? let's go back to COVID-19. Is COVID-19 a zoonosis?
Yes, I think it is.
Wow.
I've read a lot of the papers, and there's really strong evidence that it came from these wet markets. You know, we're scientists, and scientists can never say anything with 100%
Right.
certainty, right?
That's life, right? There's only
Yeah,
one certain thing, and we all know what that is.
yeah. And, you
Taxes.
know, so we can't say that it didn't come from a laboratory, but the evidence is really strong that it came from these markets where, you know, a bat had a coronavirus and it was sitting next to a pangolin and it gave it to them and it made it change, and, you know, maybe it had a coronavirus. And so it's just this soup of viruses that happen when you keep all of these animals from the wild in these cages right next to each other. I don't know if you've seen any pictures of those wet markets. Frankly, it's way more frightening than a virology lab. I mean,
Wow.
they are really a sight to behold. So yeah, I mean, that's what I believe, right?
So it's called a wet market because the animals are live or dead?
They're live. Yeah. I don't actually know where the term wet market comes from. I
Mhm.
think because maybe they have a lot of fish and turtles and, you know, things in buckets that
Okay.
they're selling, but there's also a lot of mammals there as well.
It sounds like a massive petri dish.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow, because
Yeah.
I know I've been in South America, to these roadside stands with the meat hanging out just in the open air and the flies everywhere. And that
Yep.
just, that's just a testimony to how powerful the human gut is. Except for us tourists, we don't have that gut. Yeah, and
Right.
we don't want to find that out the hard way.
Yeah, 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 that's absolutely true. No, there's lots of examples where bushmeat is the cause of disease in people. I mean, that's how people get Ebola, from eating bats.
Eating bats.
Hmm. Hmm.
There can't be that much meat on a bat. Why would we even try? Right?
Well, so these are big fruit bats. I mean, some of the
Oh, the
fruit
big
bats
fruit bats. Yeah.
in Africa can be really large. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So this is where Ebola comes from. I read a book about that one time. I didn't realize they finally pinpointed the origin of this.
Yeah, so fruit bats are the source, and then it goes human to human to human, and it actually doesn't transmit all that well, right? It's culturally in some parts of Africa, people get very close to corpses, right, and, you know, wash the bodies, and I think that cultural practice can really lend itself to transmission.
I always thought what was interesting that I learned about Ebola and diseases like it, it's such an incredibly efficient killer that it has trouble actually sustaining a run.
Exactly. Exactly.
Whereas,
Yeah.
like the stupid flu, I mean, everybody in Florida got sick this year, right?
Yep.
Kind of moseys along.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to hit that sweet point, right? If you're a virus, you want to you want to do things that make people transmit the virus, right? What happens when you get the flu? You're sneezy, you've got all
Right.
this snot, and that's how it gets transmitted.
Right. So, what was going on in Florida this year? I mean, there's a lot of people sick.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the statistics, but, you know, there's that RSF virus,
Right.
there's flu that's going around, and then of course COVID. So we've got sort of this trilogy of winter viruses that have been circulating around. I think last winter too as well. So
It
yeah,
seems like our weather this year might be aiding and abetting because it's been so cold and so dark and so wet.
yeah, it really has been. It really has been. Our lakes up here in Gainesville are filled up right now.
Wow. Well, that brings us to our next topic, and that is the avian flu. What do we have any updates on what's going on there?
I haven't looked at the statistics lately to see what's going on. It's certainly ongoing. Um, yeah, yeah. I haven't had an update on that in a while from USDA, so I wonder if maybe things are panning out a little bit.
I don't know. How do we as trappers protect ourselves from something like that? I mean, it's not exactly zoonotic yet, right?
No, well, so as far as I know, it's still just one. There was one case of a human getting this latest high path avian influenza virus, and he was a poultry worker, right? So he was handling carcasses regularly. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, I think even hearing your guest last time, anytime you're handling birds, particularly in a closed environment, or if you're in a situation where there's a lot of dead birds, you definitely want to wear a respirator.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I just got one for that exact reason. Well, actually, for rodent droppings.
Same idea. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm going to flip screens here on the other side because I wanted to ask you about something that I absolutely did not know about. And it wasn't Lassa virus, which I just saw come up here. It had to do with, well, maybe I'm not going to find it because I'm not as organized as I need to be. But it had to do with the diseases that are actually carried by possums. And I was always under the impression that possums were not really, big carriers of zoonotic disease. But, oh, here it is. So opossums can carry a number of infectious diseases, including leptospirosis,
Mhm.
tuberculosis, relapsing fever, tularemia, spotted fever, toxoplasmosis, coccidiosis, and Chagas disease. I
Mhm.
mean, what are all these things?
Yeah, so let's talk about lepto for a few minutes. So, leptospirosis is a bacterial pathogen that is caused causes a lot of kidney problems. And it's transmitted in the urine of rodents, in pigs, a lot of mammal species. And people think of it as being waterborne. So it can survive in water as well. And so water can be a source of infection. So a possum urine or pig urine flows into a waterway, and then let's say you go swimming in this waterway. Um, Particularly in more stagnant waters, you can become infected. Um, there's a Your dogs can become infected, drinking. I mean, I don't know about your dogs. My dogs find the nastiest water around, and that's
Wow.
exactly where they go to drink, right? And so they can get it as well, and it's bad for them. There is a vaccine for lepto, and we have our dogs vaccinated because they run around on our farm a fair bit.
Okay.
So yeah, that's one you want to be careful of. A lot of these pathogens that you mentioned are carried in the feces, and so things like salmonella
Mm-hmm.
is sort of oral fecally transmitted. So definitely, if you're poking around in your garden and you've got possums, you definitely want to wear gloves, gardening gloves. And then when you come back in, wash your hands. That's the safest thing to do. There's all sorts of pathogens that are carried in feces. So that's just a good idea.
Now, I understand that they also carry a disease that affects horses in their feces.
Yeah, equine protozoal myoloencephalopathy.
Okay. It does not sound good.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it. That's more of
Okay.
a veterinary disease. But yeah, they can cause that.
What is this chagas? I don't like the sound of that one.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've done in my lab, we've done a little bit of research on which wildlife carry Chagas disease. So Chagas disease is a protozoan is a disease that's caused by a protozoan called Trypanosoma cruzi. And it's actually quite prevalent in South and Central America. It's a when it gets into people, it causes it migrates to either the heart tissue or to the gut, and it causes a really really severe disease. So it lead if you are infected with it, it leads to congenital heart failure.
Wow. Is
Um,
this another fecal thing or?
Yeah, so in Central and South America, so it's got a complex life cycle. So the natural life cycle is between wildlife hosts and kissing bugs.
Oh, the kiss.
So that's the natural cycle. And typically when people get it, it's from the bite of a kissing bug. And it's not actually the bite, I should say. So you get bit by a kissing bug, and what these kissing bugs do, as soon as they've finished taking their blood meal, they poop on you. And the trypanosomes are actually in the poop. And what happens when you get a bite of an insect? You scratch it, and you
Right.
actually rub that feces that has the trypanosome into your skin.
Wow.
So, in opossums are a big part of completing that life cycle.
So in the absence of the kissing bug, chagas can propagate?
We usually would say yes. There's some indication that opossums can complete the life cycle by themselves. It's not definitive, but there's some indication that they can complete the life cycles by themselves. When we look at the trypanosome, sorry, at the kissing bugs and the infection rates in them, it's super high. So they are definitely a big part of the system. Now we have Trypanosoma cruzi and Chagas disease in Florida, and we have kissing bugs, but our kissing bugs act a little differently. If
Okay.
they bite people, they don't actually poop right then and there. And so we don't
Weird.
see a lot of Chagas in people in Florida. In fact, we've never seen any Chagas disease in Florida, even though about 40% of the opossums in Florida are infected with Trypanosoma cruzi.
Oh, wow. Wow. So we need to be a lot more careful handling those animals.
Yeah, and it's common sense stuff. It's wear
Right.
gloves. It's, wash your hands when you're done. I mean,
Hmm.
it really is common sense stuff.
So you made me think of some of these horrible diseases that people are getting now from mosquitoes. Are those considered zoonotic diseases? Like the
Mm,
one if a pregnant woman gets bit, that'll have a
Zika.
negative Zika. Yeah,
Yeah.
is that zoonotic? I mean, it comes from a bite of an insect.
Yeah. So we call those vector-borne disease, and typically that just means like arthropod-borne, something like malaria that's carried by mosquitoes, or dengue. Um, our mosquito our arthropod-borne, mosquito-borne diseases, and so we generally call them vector-borne diseases. And in South Florida, with climate change, we're seeing them creep further and further north from the tropics. So we regularly get dengue fever. We regularly see chikungunya. And then of course we had the Zika outbreak a few years back, and those are all
Right.
tropical diseases moving north.
So when we look at climate change, And we just had our local city publish the sea rise level here, which has been about 9 inches over the past 20 or
Wow.
30 years. So I'm not going to be a climate denier. Climate changes all the time. It's kind of like the stock market. It always goes up, but it can go down. The question is whether you outlive the down period. So, what what can we expect from zoonotic diseases as things get wetter or things
Yeah.
get warmer? I mean, will we become more tropical and we'll see more tropical type zoonoses?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And uh, I definitely, yeah, it's a good question. So yes, I mean, I definitely think we're seeing arthropods move further and further north. So, um, for instance,
Tell us what that is. What's an arthropod?
so insects. So mosquitoes are able to survive further and further north. Things like midges or no-see-ums can survive further and further north. And so we see, and ticks are moving further and further north. So we are seeing some of those tick-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases, midge-borne diseases occurring further and further north. There never used to be Lyme disease in Canada. Now there's Lyme disease in Canada. There's a midge-borne disease that affects deer called epizootic hemorrhagic disease. It happened in Canada for the first time in 2019. We see dengue regularly in Florida and not infrequently in Tampa as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've got climate change, we've got the migration of these diseases. What happens when we add a surge in the population in the state of Florida? What does that do to this disease landscape?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for
Because obviously
diseases.
we're going to see a lot of pressure on nature. A lot of animals are going to be displaced, and we already have massive mammal loss from invasive snakes in the Everglades, the
Yeah,
pythons. And we've
yeah,
got everything being churned up, all of the native lands being turned into condos.
yeah. That
So I
is a
wonder,
fact.
when we look at all of this, what does it mean? What
Yeah,
does that translate into from a
yeah,
zoonotic point of view?
yeah. Well, I mean, I think we can make some predictions, but there's this sort of stochastic element that we don't know. But some of the you're absolutely right. We'll see a decline in some of our native wildlife, or a lot of our native wildlife, and an increase in animals that can persist with humans, right? Things like rats, things like mosquitoes. Um, and a lot of those are really, really good vectors for disease. Rodents, in particular, are really good vectors for disease. And so I do think that it increases the probability. We talked about reservoirs of disease,
Right.
these wildlife reservoirs. And so we may enable some of these species that can actually be good reservoirs of disease.
And we're going to do that by basically clearing space for them to multiply.
Yeah, because some of these are like living around people. Opossums, raccoons, rats, they flourish where there are
Right.
people. There's lots of trash. We make good habitat for them. And so we'll continue to see increases in that kind of wildlife.
And of course, the iguanas, uh, they are very much in human occupied areas because
Yeah,
we present a risk to their predators. So we actually provide that space for them to flourish.
yeah, absolutely. And lots of vegetation for them to eat.
Right. Yeah, with the gardens and the lush landscaping, and
Mhm.
we're watering everything, and we've got,
Mhm.
canals and blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So what risks do the iguanas pose? I understand that there's some salmonella possibly.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah, I mean, I think for any reptile, you really want to be careful. Every year, people buy turtles for their kids
Mm,
from pet stores, and every year you see kids get sick because what do?
yes,
They put those turtles in their mouths, or they put their hands in their mouths after they've handled turtles. Yeah, there's something about the skin of reptiles that salmonella really likes to grow in, and then it causes an enteric disease, a gut disease in people.
and that's a treatable disease.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think gut diseases are always are tricky, right? Because you give people antibiotics, but yet, you've got this microbiome in your gut that you need, and
Right.
so it can be a tricky thing to treat, I think.
So when we look at this biomass, when we take all things into consideration, how are zoonotic diseases changing humanity?
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean,
Particularly modern humans, right? I mean, we're
yeah,
not the resilient, the old Homo sapiens, the one that took on the Cro-Magnons. We're all
yeah,
city dwellers here.
exactly. I mean, I think about the way our society has changed after SARS-CoV-2, and
Right.
what do we think about now? We think about our life before and after, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
what a bright line, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
Didn't
it's
take
really
long
changes our
for
behavior.
things really changed.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we could see more of that.
Oh, I definitely think we'll see more pandemics. We're such a connected world, right? We're
Right.
we're we're 2 flights away from anywhere on the globe. It's absolutely amazing to me. I mean, I got to Serbia in 2 flights. I can get to
That's
Africa in
amazing.
2 flights, right? So
Right.
so it's really easy to move things around, and not just people, but animals, right? We
Right.
move animals all the time.
Right. So are you or your colleagues looking at these ancient viruses that are emerging from the melting permafrost? It sounds like the beginning of a bad movie.
Yeah, yeah, totally,
Like
totally. No,
28
I'm
days
not.
later.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not studying them, but boy, I think it's super fascinating. I think I mean, a little terrifying, but super fascinating. Super fascinating. Isn't that the way the movie The Thing starts? Isn't that is
I'm sure there's plenty of movies that start that way, but the facts are they are finding, viruses that have survived 20, 30,000 years frozen. And now the
Yeah.
permafrost is melting, and there they are, just
Yeah.
ready to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. Lord Almighty.
Yeah, I just wonder you know, what that effect will be.
Well, nothing that's here today has seen it before, so everybody's going to be susceptible, right? I
Oh,
mean,
that's
that's
true. So there's no immunity. We
yeah.
don't. Immunities are not something that we transmit. I mean, I thought breast milk had some immunities that are transmitted, but genetically we don't transmit immunities, do we?
That's a complicated question. So you have factors that can be genetic, but not necessarily to particular diseases. And you're right. So you can get maternal antibodies. So if mom has seen a pathogen, she can pass on that immunity to her infant if with breast milk, but it's pretty short lived.
Okay.
It's pretty short lived. It's not for life or anything like that. It's months long.
Okay. But our gut biome isn't that our first line of defense for immunity in a lot of ways?
Certainly for anything that and this the acid in your stomach, right? So does a nice job of taking and even the acid in your saliva does a pretty good job of killing a lot of microbes.
Right.
I
So
mean,
you
we're,
have
if you think about it, we're being assaulted on all sides by bacteria and viruses every day, and we
yeah.
don't get sick every day, right? So, I mean, our body does actually a pretty phenomenal job of keeping these things at bay.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a whole population on Prilosec now, so how is that going to help this situation?
I don't know the answer to that.
It's insane. Well, I really appreciate your time, Dr. Sam. I really
Yeah.
do want to hear about your conference. Could
Yeah,
we
yeah.
talk
So,
about your conference? What's your conference? Tell us about this. It's so interesting.
yeah, so in March, I'm heading to California for it's a biannual conference. It happens every other year. It's called the Vertebrate Pest Conference, and animal control specialists from all over the country come and we talk about the best and the latest ways to control animals. This particular conference will have a special session on feral pigs, and it'll also have a special session on rodents. So
Okay.
best practices for trapping them and controlling them. There's usually some talks about personal protective gear, and it's this really nice mix between science and management. So,
Okay.
what's the latest science in how to manage these nuisance animals? And then, like, how do we apply that to real world scenarios?
That is really interesting. So, as a scientist, what is your primary interest? What, when you go to this conference, are you there to give a presentation or to learn about more advances in zoonotics? Where do you fit in that?
So, a little bit of both. So, I'm going to present a talk about some research that my students and I did, and we're using mosquito blood meals. So when
What?
mosquitoes fly and they take a blood meal, we actually take those mosquitoes and we smush them onto cards, and then
Okay.
we extract the DNA out of that blood meal, and we can figure out who that mosquito was feeding on, what species.
Wow. Okay.
Was it feeding on a pig or a rodent or a this or a that? And we actually are able to detect a lot of invasive species that way. So we're reporting on this technique to actually be able to find cryptic invasive species. So can you use
Really?
it to find pythons in new areas? Maybe you can use it to find pigs in areas that you didn't particularly know about.
Please
So
don't tell me they're looking for Bigfoot this way.
if I find him, I'll tell you.
How would you know? Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So yeah, happy to report back on like the best talks that I see there and the coolest new techniques if you'll have me back.
Yeah, absolutely. I really look forward to it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Super fun.
Well, we'll talk soon, especially after your conference. I want to hear all about it.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you.